Once, in the southern part of America, millions of African men, women, and children were forced to live as slaves. They were not treated as people, they were treated as property, bought and sold like objects. From the first light of morning until the sun went down, they worked in the fields, growing cotton, sugar, and tobacco. Their hands were rough, their backs ached, and their bodies were covered with scars. They had no rest, no freedom, and no choice. A slave could not say no. If they tried to rest, they were punished. If they spoke out, they were beaten. Even if they cried, no one came to help them. Families were broken apart every day. A mother could be sold to one master, her child to another. A husband could be taken miles away, never to return. The pain of being separated from loved ones was worse than the pain of any whip. They were not allowed to learn to read or write, because their masters feared that knowledge would make them dream of freedom. But even in such darkness, their hearts refused to give up. They believed that one day, something would change. At night, after the long day's work, they looked at the stars and whispered prayers. They dreamed of walking freely, of living without fear, of holding their families close without anyone tearing them apart again. That dream, the dream of freedom, started a silent movement in their hearts. A movement that would soon grow into something powerful. Something called the Underground Railroad. A secret path that helped them escape slavery and find a new life of hope. For years, enslaved people in the American South lived a life of pain and fear. But even in that pain, one thing never left their hearts: the dream of freedom. They had never seen a free life, but they could imagine it. They imagined waking up without someone shouting orders. They imagined working for their own families, not for their masters. They imagined holding their children without fear of losing them. At night, when the fields were silent and the sky was full of stars, they talked softly to each other. Someone would whisper, "Up north, people live free. No one owns you there." That one line, "No one owns you there," became a spark that burned inside every heart. Many had heard stories about a place far away, where the laws were different, where black men and women could walk on the roads without chains, where families stayed together, and where no one could sell them again. For them, that place was not just a direction, it was a dream called the North. Some even spoke of a land beyond the North, Canada, where freedom was protected by law. It sounded like heaven. But between them and freedom were hundreds of miles of danger. Forests, rivers, wild animals, and slave catchers. One wrong step could mean death or being caught and whipped again. Still, some were ready to take that risk. They said, "It's better to die trying to be free than to live forever in chains." And slowly, that dream started turning into a plan. A plan whispered in the dark, passed from one slave to another. A plan to escape. They didn't know yet how. But they knew why. Because freedom was worth everything, even their lives. And that strong desire to be free became the heartbeat of a secret path. The path that people would soon call the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad. It sounds like a train, doesn't it? But it wasn't a real railroad. There were no tracks, no trains, and no tickets. It was something far more powerful. A secret network of people and safe places that helped enslaved men, women, and children escape to freedom. In the South, slaves who dreamed of freedom could not run in the open. The laws were strict, and slave catchers searched everywhere for anyone trying to escape. So brave people, both black and white, came together quietly. They built a secret path that stretched from the southern states to the north, and even farther to Canada, where slavery was not allowed. Each person who helped was given a secret name, like a code in a spy story. The conductors were the guides. They led the escaping slaves, called passengers, through forests, swamps, and rivers, always traveling at night. The safe houses along the way were called stations. A family who offered shelter was a station master. They would hide the passengers in barns, basements, or behind walls, until it was safe to move again. No one wrote anything down. Everything was passed by word of mouth. Through secret songs, symbols on quilts. Or a light in a window that meant, "It's safe to come in." Each journey was full of danger. Sometimes slave catchers were just a few steps behind. Sometimes they had to cross freezing rivers or walk for days without food. But they kept moving. Because ahead of them lay freedom. The Underground Railroad was not one road. It was thousands of small acts of courage, done by people who risked everything to help others live free. And among those heroes, one name would shine brighter than all: Harriet Tubman, the woman who would return again and again to rescue her people. That is where the next chapter of this journey begins. The Underground Railroad could never have worked without its hidden heroes. The conductors and the station masters. They were not trained workers. They were brave men and women, both black and white, who risked everything to help slaves escape to freedom. A conductor was like a guide. He or she would lead small groups of runaway slaves, called passengers, through forests, across rivers, and over dark roads, always at night. They followed the North Star, the only light they could trust. One of the most famous conductors was Harriet Tubman. She escaped slavery herself. But instead of staying safe, she went back again and again to rescue others. More than 300 people in total. People called her Moses, because, like the prophet, she led her people to freedom. But Harriet was not alone. There were many others. Some were free black people who knew the pain of slavery. And others were white farmers, preachers, and families who believed slavery was wrong. A station master was someone who owned a safe house, a secret place where escaping slaves could rest, eat, and hide during the day. At night, they would quietly move to the next station. These safe houses were often marked with secret signs, like a lantern in the window, or a quilt hanging on the fence with special patterns. Each sign whispered one message: "It's safe here." But being a conductor or a station master was dangerous. If caught, they could be fined, beaten, or even killed. Still, they continued, because they believed that helping one person find freedom was worth more than their own safety. Each time a slave reached a safe house, it was a small victory against slavery itself. And each person who helped became a part of something greater, a chain of courage that stretched across America. They didn't wear uniforms. They didn't have medals. But their bravery was written in every life they saved. They were the silent soldiers of freedom. The conductors who led the way. And the station masters who came. Her name was Harriet Tubman. She was born into slavery, in a world where her body was owned. And her life was not her own. As a young girl, she worked long hours in the fields. She was beaten, insulted, and treated like she was nothing. Once, when she tried to protect another slave from being hit, she was struck on the head, so hard that she fainted and carried that injury for life. But even after all the pain, Harriet's spirit could not be broken. She dreamed of freedom. And one dark night, she finally decided she would run. Without food, without a map. She followed the North Star through swamps and forests, hiding by day, walking by night. Every sound, every shadow could mean danger. But she never stopped. At last, she crossed into the north. For the first time, she was free. But Harriet could not rest. She said, "I had reasoned this out in my mind. There was one of two things I had a right to: liberty or death. If I could not have one, I would have the other." She could have stayed safe. But she chose to go back, again and again. To rescue her family, her friends, and complete strangers. Each time she returned to the South, she risked her life. If caught, she would have been hanged. But Harriet was fearless. She became a conductor on the Underground Railroad, guiding more than 300 slaves to freedom across secret routes, never losing a single person. She carried a small gun, not to fight, but to keep people strong when they were afraid to continue. She would whisper, "We're going to be free or die trying." People began to call her Moses. Because, like the Moses from the Bible, she led her people out of slavery, through the darkness, into the light of freedom. Even during the Civil War, Harriet continued to serve. As a nurse, a spy, and a leader for the Union Army. She never stopped fighting for justice. When she was old, she said, "I never ran my train off the track. And I never lost a passenger." Harriet Tubman proved that, during the time of slavery, every word a slave spoke was watched. Every movement was controlled. But even when their voices were chained, their minds found a way to speak, through songs and secret codes. Slaves were not allowed to read or write. If they were caught learning letters, they were punished. So, they created another language. A secret language made of music, patterns, and symbols. When they worked in the fields or sat outside their cabins, they sang songs that sounded like prayers or work chants. But hidden inside those songs were directions to freedom. One famous song was called, "Follow the Drinking Gourd." To the masters, it sounded harmless. But to the slaves, it meant something powerful. The drinking gourd was not a real object. It was the Big Dipper, a group of stars in the night sky. Following it pointed the way north, toward freedom. Another song said, "Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water." It meant, walk through the rivers to hide your scent from the slave catchers and their dogs. Every line was a clue. Every melody a map. Even quilts carried messages. Women stitched secret patterns, like the log cabin, or flying geese design, and hung them on fences or windows. Each pattern told the travelers where to go next. Safe house ahead, danger nearby, or time to move at night. These songs and quilts looked simple, but they were full of courage and intelligence. They were the tools of survival, created by people who refused to give up hope. When Harriet Tubman guided her passengers, she often used these very songs. A change in the rhythm or the verse could tell others whether the path was safe or not. So while their masters heard only music, the slaves heard freedom calling. Their voices carried secret maps. Their hands sewed paths of escape. And together, these hidden messages helped hundreds find their way to liberty. It was proof that even when speech was forbidden, the heart always finds a way to speak. Escaping from slavery was never simple. It was a journey filled with danger, fear, and pain. A journey where one wrong step could mean death or a return to chains. When night fell, small groups of men, women, and even children would leave the plantations quietly. They carried no luggage, no light, only hope. They walked through dark forests and muddy swamps, hiding from the sound of barking dogs and galloping horses. Every rustle in the leaves, every breaking twig, could mean slave catchers were near. Slave catchers were paid to hunt them down. They carried ropes, guns, and posters with rewards for every runaway slave. If they were caught, they were whipped, chained, and sold again, often to harsher masters. The nights were cold. Food was hard to find. Many escaped slaves ate wild berries or drank water from rivers just to survive. Sometimes they traveled for weeks without seeing a single friendly face. And yet they kept walking, guided by the stars, and by the courage that burned in their hearts. When the rain poured, they hid under trees. When they crossed rivers, they used fallen logs as bridges. Some even walked barefoot across snow, leaving behind bloody footprints that told the story of their struggle. But there were moments of kindness too. A farmer who left food by the road. A church that opened its door at night. A woman who whispered, "You can rest here, it's safe." Every safe house they reached was like a small victory. But there was never time to celebrate. They had to keep moving before the sun rose. Before someone saw them. Before hope was lost again. And still, they never gave up. They believed freedom was worth every step. Every tear, every wound. Some didn't make it to the north. But their courage cleared the path for others to follow. Their footprints became the road map of freedom. The journey was full of danger. But it was also full of bravery. Because every mile they walked said one thing loud and clear. Every step on the Underground Railroad was filled with danger. But scattered along that dark road were small lights of hope. The safe houses and the allies who ran them. A safe house was not a big building or a grand mansion. Sometimes it was just a small farmhouse, a church, or a cabin deep in the woods. But for those escaping slavery, it felt like heaven. When the night was cold and their feet were bleeding, a light in a window could mean safety. It was a signal, silent but powerful, that someone inside cared enough to risk everything. The people who owned these homes were called station masters. Many were Quakers, a religious group who believed that all humans were equal before God. Others were farmers, preachers, or poor families, who simply refused to stay silent while others suffered. When a group of runaways reached a safe house, the door would quietly open. Inside, they would find food, clean water, and a warm place to rest. Sometimes there were whispers of comfort. "You're safe now. Rest a while. The next station is 10 miles north." The helpers never asked for thanks. They only said, "Keep going. Don't stop until you're free." But helping was dangerous. If caught, these allies could be fined, jailed, or even attacked. Still, they continued, because their hearts told them it was right. Some families built hidden rooms behind walls or under floors, where runaways could hide when slave catchers came. Children in those families grew up learning silence, because one careless word could cost a life. In the North, more people joined the cause. They raised money, spread secret messages, and guided escapees toward Canada, the land where slavery had no power. Every safe house was a small candle burning in the darkness of slavery. Every ally who helped was part of a chain of courage that stretched across the nation. Without them, thousands would never have reached freedom. They were the silent protectors, the people who turned their homes into hope. After weeks, sometimes months, of walking in fear and hunger, escaping slaves finally reached the North, and for some, even Canada. For the first time, they could walk on roads without chains. They could sleep without fear of being captured. Families could stay together. Children could laugh freely without worrying about being sold away. But freedom was not easy at first. They arrived in strange towns far from home, with little money, no jobs, and often no friends. They had to rebuild their lives from nothing. Still, the feeling of freedom was stronger than any hardship. Every breath of clean air, every step on open land, felt like a victory over centuries of pain. Communities of free black people helped them start new lives. They found work, education, and safe places to live. Churches welcomed them, and some people who had helped on the Underground Railroad continued to guide them to safety and opportunity. Canada became a special land for many. Slavery was illegal there, and the law protected them. They could live without fear. And they could finally begin to dream about the future. To learn, to grow, and to live as full human beings. But even in freedom, the memories of slavery remained. The pain of family separation, the scars on their bodies, and the terror they had endured would never fully leave them. Still, the courage that had carried them through forests, rivers, and danger remained unbroken. They shared their stories with others, inspiring hope for those still in slavery. Reaching freedom was not just a personal victory. It was a symbol of courage, resilience, and the unstoppable human spirit. It proved one thing clearly. No chain, no master, no fear could stop a heart that longed to be free. And that longing, that hope, became the heartbeat of generations to come. The Underground Railroad was more than just a path to freedom. It was a story of courage, hope, and humanity. It was built by people who risked their lives to help others escape the chains of slavery. The heroes, the conductors, the station masters, Harriet Tubman, and countless others, showed the world that one person's bravery can change hundreds of lives. Even after slavery ended, their story did not end. It inspired generations to fight for justice, equality, and human rights. The courage of those who walked in the dark, guided by the North Star, remains a symbol that freedom is worth fighting for. The safe houses, the secret songs, the hidden quilts. They were not just tools of survival. They were acts of love and resistance. Today, we remember their sacrifice. We honor the lives that were lost. And we celebrate the lives that were saved. Their footsteps became the path for the civil rights movement. For voices that refused to stay silent. For people who continue to fight against injustice around the world. The Underground Railroad teaches us one simple truth. Courage can move mountains. Hope can break chains. And even in the darkest times, humanity can shine its brightest. The legacy of those brave men and women is still alive today. Every person who stands up for freedom. Every hand that helps another. Every voice that speaks against injustice. Carries the spirit of the Underground Railroad. Their journey may have ended on the maps of history. But the heart of their courage keeps guiding us toward a world where freedom, dignity, and hope are for everyone. They risked everything to give others a chance to live. Their courage will never be forgotten.